Okay, guys, welcome to this live stream. Today we're going to be discussing, or I'm going to be discussing a very, very interesting topic. I've mentioned or spoken about this topic in previous videos, here and there, but I think it's important to sort of put aside a little bit of time and really discuss this particular point. And the topic I want to talk about today, or what I'm referring to, is roots to knowledge and proofs for God. Now, generally what seems to happen or tends to happen is whenever, atheists or non-Muslims or anyone that's, looking into the question of God begins to inquire, they begin to look for reasons and proofs for God's existence, they don't stop for a moment and they don't seem to think about, okay, what do I consider to be sufficient proof? What do I consider to be sufficient proof, which if I was to find, and I would, therefore believe in God and do what I need to do. And on top of this, those, even us Muslims, sometimes, unfortunately, when we speak to atheists, we speak to non-Muslims, when we're asked for proof for God's existence, we straight away go into it, and it's not a problem. We straight away go into it, and we start to give proofs, but we don't deal with a very fundamental underlying issue and problem, which is there. And the problem I want to talk about is understanding roots to knowledge. What do we consider, what modes do we consider to be there which allow us to attain knowledge? And what do we accept, what modes do we accept to be modes that lead us to certain knowledge, right? What leads us to knowledge? And the reason I want to address this, and you can see in the title as well, I begin with mentioning roots to knowledge and then proofs for God. Right? Because I really believe if we really understand how we attain knowledge, as human beings, we believe in many things, but if we really stop and think about how did I end up with that belief in that particular thing? So for example, I believe my parents are my parents. Now that's a belief I hold, but how did I arrive at that belief? How did I get to that belief? It's a very important question because the reason we need to understand roots to knowledge, how we end up believing what we believe, is because it will really help us in the question of God and coming to the belief in God. And there's a reason for this, which I'll explain as we go along. Now, the very first myth that I want to dispel is a myth which is very prevalent in the times that we live in. It's a way of thinking, it's a way of seeing the world which has become common. Right? It goes without saying. It just is. It's become the standard of the 21st century. And that, generally speaking, is that for us to believe, or you to believe in something, you need to see that thing. That's the simplest way I could put it. So it's to do with empiricism, right? Human beings, us as human societies and human beings, have adopted this mode or route to knowledge as the primary route to knowledge. It's just become bread and butter, standard, right? But the question, the thing I want us to really think about is that it doesn't have to be this way. Why is it this way? And what I want to do in the course of this video is show you that many things, even today, many things that we believe in are not based on empirical data, are not based on, science, are not based on observations, but we utilize other routes to knowledge to formulate the beliefs that we hold, right? So before I go any further, anyone that's watching this right now, please make sure to share this if you're a Muslim. Assalamu alaikum. May Allah bless you guys. Please share this on your pages with all of your non-Muslim friends and contacts. If you are a non-Muslim that's tuning in, I really, really hope and, recommend you guys stay through till the end of the video, and I'm sure you'll find something beneficial. And please do leave your questions below if you have any questions at the end, and we'll be more than happy to address you and try to give you guys answers, right? That being said, going back to the topic, roots to knowledge, right? And before I went off on a tangent mentioning that make sure you share this video, I just quickly highlighted that we live in the 21st century and the standard way of thinking or the standard mode of attaining knowledge, the route to knowledge has become empiricism. It's all about seeing is believing, and this has become standard. And this is embedded within our minds and our psyches from a very young age through our educational institutes, through our education, through schooling, through our social engagements, and the list goes on, right? Now, why is this a problem, right? it's a big problem because, like I said before, one reason is because many things we believe in are not based on empirical data or empiricism. And secondly, if we limit ourselves to this idea that science is the only way to truth, putting in a crude way, or that the only way I'll believe in something is if I see that thing and I can engage with that thing, I can feel that thing and I can taste that thing and smell it, then what will end up happening is you will end up pretty much believing in very few things, right? And you will pigeonhole yourself. You'll put yourself in this very narrow band of attaining truth, right? You will just be limiting yourself as a human being. And I'll give you some examples to this too. But I want us to understand, the first point I want us to understand and appreciate is that there is a standard that's been set that us human beings in the 21st century are almost directed to follow and to attain knowledge via, which is empiricism, science. Seeing is believing. Empirical data is what counts. If there's no empirical data, then that thing does not exist. This is a very common sort of narrative which is pushed by new atheists, such as Richard Dawkins, and the list goes on. And it's a general way of thinking that we've developed as human beings, right? This wasn't always the case throughout history, right? If you look at the works of philosophers and thinkers, they acknowledged and realized that there were many routes to knowledge, right? If anything, reason was something, and reason and logic was something that people focused on a lot more previously. But unfortunately, we live in a world today which doesn't follow the method. But I think we need to start to understand this reality, because it's not something we can get rid of. We can't just say, oh, look, we have science. It's an amazing method. It's an amazing tool to inquire about the world and learn about the world. Therefore, we don't need any other routes to knowledge. We don't need any other modes to figure out what's true and what exists and what to believe in, right? This is simply not true. And the proof for that is that we believe in many things which are not based on science. Case in point, our own parents, and I mentioned this earlier, and I've mentioned this many times before, and I want you to really think about this for a second. Every single one of us that's watching this live stream right now, every single one of us believes that my mother and my father both are my parents, right? Every single one of us believes that. Unless there is something wrong with us, we would believe this, right? Now, if we were to ask ourselves the question, why do I believe my parents are my parents? And really think about that question for a second. What we will quickly realize is that, hold on a second, that is not based on empirical data. And then very quickly you may think to yourself, well, hold on a second, I can do a DNA test. That's a potential. I could do a DNA test. But you haven't done a DNA test, right? Meaning that right now you believe your parents are your parents, not based on a potential DNA test, but it's based on something else, right? Hopefully you guys are following. It's a very important point we need to understand and appreciate here, which is that we believe in things as human beings, and we have conviction in our beliefs about these things, and many things we believe in are not based on science, are not based on empirical data, right? For example, like I said, our parents. We believe in our parents not based on science, but instead testimony. The testimony of our parents, meaning their say-so, what they told us. The testimony of our siblings. The testimony maybe of our uncles and aunties, right? You may say, well, I've seen pictures of myself as a baby. But again, someone is telling you that in that picture, that's you. So it's primarily based on testimony, right? So testimony is one route to knowledge. Reason, logic, thinking, reflection, right? These are other modes to acquiring truth, right? Now, you may ask the question, well, okay, if there are many routes to knowledge, if there's many ways of knowing what's true, and we still utilize those in the 21st century, which we do, every single one of us does, even if you're an atheist, you do, then why have we ended up in this world where there is this pressure almost to make people think down this one channel that seeing is believing? Science is the way to truth. Empiricism is the way to go. I believe one of the reasons is because science has progressed, and science is an amazing thing. It's an amazing method of inquiry. We have learned so much about the world. We have developed so much as far as medicine is concerned, and as far as technology is concerned, and all of these amazing things. And I think because of this, what's ended up happening is that development and progress has almost become a dominating way of thinking, right? And it's obviously pushed in certain spheres, and over time it becomes a norm of thinking. We think because science is so amazing and has progressed in so many amazing ways and has given the world so much, therefore science must be the only way to truth, and we make this conflation, right? And it almost happens subconsciously in some respects, and obviously it's pushed by certain thinkers and individuals. But it doesn't logically follow just because science has progressed and given us so many amazing things in this world, therefore science is the only way to truth. No, science deals with the physical. Science deals with the physical realm, the material world, right? I think it was Bertrand Russell who once said, science, I'm paraphrasing, he says science, what did he say? He says science is attempts to discover and understand the physical world by means of observation and then reasoning upon that observation. So you do your observations, utilizing your senses, you observe the world, you gather data, and then you reason upon that data and try to understand what's going on. It's a beautiful tool, it's a beautiful method. It's actually a method that was developed by the Muslims in history, right? That's a whole different topic. But it's important to know that Muslims had no problem with the scientific method. And by the way, again, some atheists want to create this divide between science and Islam, right? They say, look, science is on one side, it's progressive and it's amazing, and Islam is totally on the other side. It's a backward religion from over 1400 years ago. And they try to create these types of narratives, but it's simply not true. If we look into history, we look at the golden ages of Islam, and we look at, Islamic Spain and the amazing work the Muslim scientists did, in not only developing the sciences, but also taking the works of the ancients and translating them and preserving them and learning from them and building upon them, right? Muslims never had a problem with science, right? Muslims understood that this method is such an amazing method and a blessing from God, right? It's a huge blessing from God if you really think about it. Science, the fact that we can engage in what we call science, is a miracle. And the atheists don't want you to think about this, but I want to really bring this point out right now because it just come to mind and I think it's very important. And let me repeat what I just said. The fact that we can do science, we can engage in what we call science, this method, is a miracle. And the reason I say this is this, and probably I'll do a separate video on this later, but the reason I say this is this. Number one, for us to do science, there has to be a world which is intelligible. There has to be a world, meaning there has to be a world which is ordered to some extent. It follows a certain pattern. There has to be something there that you can study. There has to be something there that you can pick up on and you can understand. And that when you return to that very same thing, it won't just change at random, right? There has to be some sort of consistency, some sort of uniformity there, right? First point. How do you account for that uniformity in the absence of God? What are you going to say? Just random happenings resulted in an ordered universe? That's a huge problem. That doesn't explain anything, right? And the second thing you need is you need a rational mind. You need a human intellect. You need rational faculties which are ordered enough to be able to understand and process the information and attain truth eventually, right? You need both of these things. Both of these things cannot be explained in the absence of God. So the fact that we can do science is a sign in and of itself that God exists, right? And it's a very powerful, I wouldn't say it's a very strong, logical argument. It doesn't have to be. It's a very intuitive argument. And most human beings, we go off intuition all the time. Intuition is a very big thing, right? It's a very clear, concise, intuitive point. If we really stop and reflect about it sincerely, we'll realize, hold on a second, wow, we have an ordered universe which is governed by laws. We have a universe which follows laws. We have a universe which is fine-tuned. And isn't it even more amazing that we have a mind? We have rational faculties that can understand this world. Think about this. If you follow the atheist paradigm, as new atheists would have you believe, or naturalists would have you believe, everything is a result of random physical stuff. It's just atoms and molecules randomly whizzing around that have been colliding into each other for millions of years and have resulted in everything we see in the world today. How is that even true? How can we say that is the truth? If we stop and really think about the reality of the world that we live in. We live in an ordered universe which has certain, conditions which are so precisely fine-tuned which allow for life to exist, but not only life to exist, intelligent life to exist, rational human beings to exist, which have the ability to reason and understand this world. That's an amazing sign in itself, right? So science itself, the fact we can do science is a proof in itself. But I digress. I'm going back to the point that yes, that science is an amazing tool. It's an amazing method. As Muslims, we don't have a problem with it. We love the method. But what we do is we appreciate what it is, and we appreciate its limits, right? And we utilize it for what it is. That being said, going back to the point that science is not the only way to truth, and it's important that I made this point because what I want us to really understand here is sometimes some people, when they see Muslims saying, oh, look at this Muslim, he's saying science isn't the only way to truth, there's other ways to acquire knowledge. Therefore, Muslims, look, they're coming out with what they really believe, that they hate science and they don't like. This is not true, right? Hopefully I've clarified that Muslims have no problem with science. We've loved science. We actually aided in the development of science and its progress in history. And it's an amazing method. It's an amazing tool. And if anything, it in and of itself is a proof for the divine, right? I would argue. That being said, let's go to this point now. So we've clarified that science isn't the only way to truth, that there are many other modes to attaining knowledge, right? And it's very important to clarify this point, guys, because normally when people are inquiring about God's existence, when they're looking into God's existence, they get stuck on this. It almost becomes a barrier, right? It becomes a big barrier for people because, they think, whenever they start inquiring about God's existence, they think, okay, I need physical proof, right? I need empirical data. Well, you don't. You really don't, because if you really think about just 10 things you believe in your life, just 10 beliefs that you have, and ask yourself how many of those beliefs are based on science. And you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. Many of those things, I would argue, would not be based on empirical data. Many of those things will be based on other things, such as testimony, such as just reason, such as intuition, and the list goes on. That being said, we need to also understand that when it comes to the question of God's existence, we need to understand God is not a part of his physical world, his physical creation. And it's another very important point to understand here, because look, if God was somehow, and we know God is not this, but just to get the point across, if God somehow was a part of the physical, then no one would have a problem in providing empirical data. But we need to really understand the point here, is that God is not a part of his physical creation. God is the creator of everything that exists. He is separate from his physical creation. He is separate from it. He is not a part of it. And it, again, intuitively and logically makes sense. How can God, the creator, the eternal creator of everything that exists, that he created, the universe that he created at a particular point, become a part of that universe? How can the eternal, all-powerful creator that has no limits become a part of his limited physical creation? It doesn't make sense. And God, and again, if you're talking to Muslims, this is our perspective, right? We're not dealing with Christians here. We're dealing with Muslims and the Muslim belief. In Islam, the concept of God is very rational, very intuitive, very logical, right? Quran, that he is unlike anything you can imagine. There is absolutely nothing like God, right? He is beyond anything you can imagine, right? He is uniquely one. He is eternal. He has no beginning. He has no end. He is the eternal creator, cause of everything that exists. And he is unlike anything you can imagine. He's not a man. He's not a bearded man sitting on the clouds or anything like this. He is nothing like. He's beyond the physical, right? Hence, therefore, beyond human comprehension. We cannot ever say, oh, look, now I can imagine God. No, you can't do that. God is beyond what we can imagine or what we can conceive of via our thoughts, because our thoughts as human beings, anything we conceive of, anything we imagine up is based on prior experiences, right? Do a little experiment. Try to think of a brand new monster, right? A new monster. You may take a few minutes to do this, but as soon as you do this, you may have a picture of this new monster in your head, but you'll realize on further inspection that, hold on a second, the tail is like the tail of a dinosaur, the head is like a crocodile, maybe, I don't know, it has wings like a bird. So we normally take prior experiences, things we've seen in this physical world, and all of our imaginations and our thoughts generally are based on those things, a combination of those things, right? So we can never imagine God, who is beyond the physical, right? Now, understanding this second point, now the question arises, Walaikum Assalam, thank you for joining Farheen. Please share this video, Farheen Khan. Going back to the point, understanding God is beyond the physical, therefore science cannot tell you about God, because science is limited to the physical, science is limited to what's physically observable. Now the question arises, what proofs do we have for God's existence, right? If you are open enough now, if you have an open mind and you've really thought about what I've said and you understand, okay, fine, science isn't the only way to truth, fine, God is beyond the physical, and that makes sense for the creator of the universe. But what's the proof then? What evidences, what signs, what do we have which could really get us to appreciate the existence of God? What I would say at this point, first and foremost, I would say, before I even give you an argument, we have many amazing rational arguments for God's existence, right? Before I even go down that route, first thing I want us to appreciate and really think about is, I would say that the belief in God, the understanding that God exists, is very intuitive and it's very natural, right? And what do I mean by this? I mean, if you look at the universe, and whenever you go out, say you go for a walk tonight and you look out into the night sky and you see the amazing stars in the heavens and you see the moon and the sun and the earth, and you look at, and you sit there and just contemplate about the simple things, the simple order within the universe, the order of the earth, the order of our solar system, the constants and quantities that are required for intelligent life to exist. Just think about you as a human being, right? The fact that you are conscious and you can think, and the fact that you can emote and you have feelings. If you just think about these things, you would, if someone, after thinking about these things, if someone presented you with an option, yeah, and they said to you, hold now, all of the things you just thought about right now, about the universe and about your own existence, and those are reflections, which two of these views make more sense of those things? View one, that everything is a result of random, accidental happenings, just atoms and molecules which have been whizzing around at random, accidentally bumping into each other and have resulted in everything we see today. That's view one. Or view two, that everything that you see in the world and all of the order that you perceive is a result of a creator, a cause who created everything that exists, right, with a purpose. Which one of these two options intuitively makes sense to you? I would argue, if you are very sincere and honest with yourself, what's intuitive is the second option, right? That there is a cause, there is a creator, there is something behind everything, right? The second point I would say is that there are some very strong rational arguments for God's existence. Now, there is a video that I put out recently on my channel. My channel is called Epistemics. You can find it on YouTube, Stemix. If you go on that channel, I recently put out a video yesterday on the argument. I made a very beautiful argument, and the argument is really, really amazing. It's a very simple metaphysical argument. It's not based on science, right? Simple reason. And I'll just present it to you very simply here. The point that he makes is this. If something is dependent, then that dependent thing is dependent upon something outside of itself, right? Everything that we perceive within the universe and the universe itself is dependent, right? Therefore, the universe and everything that we perceive is dependent upon something outside of it. Everything, including the universe, could be dependent on either something that is independent, right, and therefore necessary, or it's dependent upon something else that's dependent, right? That's fair enough. But the problem with the second option is that if the universe and everything that exists is dependent upon something else which is dependent, then you're just pushing on the question. Well, what is that thing dependent upon? Well, you can say, well, that is dependent upon something else that's dependent. Well, what else that's dependent? And what's that dependent upon? And that's dependent upon something else that's dependent. And if you go on forever, you would have an infinite chain of dependencies, and you won't have the universe, right? Logical conclusion is that the universe and everything that exists, which is dependent upon an independent creator cause, right? And this is who we call God. Very simple, powerful argument. Now, some of you may be watching this thinking, hold on a second, you haven't really made the argument. You haven't shown us why the universe is dependent, right? Now, I'll just give you a bit of a brief summary on that, and you guys can go and watch that video and you can get a lot more information on that. I'll put the link in the comments below, in the section below. The universe is dependent for the very same reason everything else is dependent. Now, let me give you an example. Dependent things have certain qualities and certain features, right? So if I show you my watch. Now, my watch, if I asked you, is this watch dependent or is it independent? Think about this for a second. Now, the conclusion you would come to very intuitively and rationally is that this watch is dependent, right? Now, what lets you know that it's dependent? Well, the very first thing is that it's not necessary. It did not have to exist. This watch did not have to exist, right? it could have not existed. But the fact that it exists and it's in existence, now we can ask the question, well, why does it exist? What brought it into being, right? So therefore, it's not necessary. And when I say necessary, I'm talking about something for which it's impossible for that thing not to exist, right? So a necessary thing is something that it is impossible for that thing not to have existed, right? Now, the second thing, number one, it didn't have to exist. Number two, it has limited physical qualities, right? It has limited physical features, qualities, right? Meaning that it has a certain shape dial. It has a certain thickness band, right? It has a certain length bracelet. These are all limited physical qualities. It didn't have to have this size dial. It didn't have to have this length bracelet. It could have been other ways, right? It could have been 101 other ways, right? The fact that it has limited physical qualities highlights that it's not necessary. It could have been another way. Third point, right, is that this watch, its fundamental parts, its fundamental building blocks could have been arranged in another way, right? Meaning its individual bits and parts could have been arranged differently. So this button here could have been placed here. This button here could have been placed here. It could have been arranged in a different way. And if it could be arranged in a different way, therefore, we can ask the question, why is it arranged in this particular way? Why is it arranged like this and not in any other way, right? So these, at least, I'm just covering three, there's many other points, but normally when you look at something dependent, it would have a combination of these three features, right? Now this watch has all three of these properties, right? It's not necessary, right? It didn't have to exist. It has limited physical qualities, and its fundamental building blocks could have been arranged in a different way, right? That tells us this watch is dependent. Now take the watch and blow it up to the size of the universe. Let me ask you guys a question. Does the same question apply? Yes. Is that watch dependent or independent? You can ask the question. Now ask the same question about the universe. Is the universe necessary? Did it have to exist? No. Does the universe have limited physical qualities, just like the watch? Yes, it does. The universe is a physical thing. It has limited physical qualities, right? Could the universe, the building blocks of the universe, the fundamental building blocks of the universe be arranged in a different way? Again, the answer is yes. The universe could have been arranged in 1,000,001 other ways, right? The constants and quantities of the universe, the laws of the universe could have been arranged in billions of other ways, trillions of other ways probably, right? I don't know, many, many other ways, right? And if it could be arranged in 1,000,001 other ways, now we can ask the question, well, why is it arranged in the way that it's arranged, right? So all these 3 points tell us that the universe, just like my watch, is dependent. And if it is dependent, therefore is dependent upon something outside of itself. And like I said in the beginning, there's only 2 options. Either is dependent on something independent and eternal, or is dependent upon something else that's dependent. And we saw the problem of saying it's dependent upon something else that's dependent. Therefore, the most rational conclusion is that the universe and everything that exists is dependent upon an eternal, independent thing, or cause, or creator. And this cause or cause we call God. We call Allah. And it's amazing because if you look at the Quran, and I'll conclude on this bit. If you look at the Quran and you look, for example, at the 112th chapter, God says very clearly, He says He is As-Samad, meaning He is the absolute, the eternal, and the one that's completely independent, right? Without any need, and everything is dependent upon Him at every single moment of its existence. Now you can see this is just one very powerful, simple argument for God's existence, which is not dependent upon science, right, or empiricism, right? And hopefully now, because I mentioned the points I mentioned in the beginning of this live stream, you guys can appreciate that. You can appreciate this argument for one, and you can appreciate that, look, maybe we need to really understand, look, God is beyond science. Science isn't the only way to truth. Therefore, I should be looking at other proofs and reasons for God's existence. And if you open your mind up to even this extent, and you're sincere and you're looking for the truth, you'll go a long way in coming to the realization of the truth of God's existence. Hopefully this has been beneficial, guys. Make sure to like the page and to share this live stream so other people could benefit too. I know I don't do this as often or as regularly as I'd like to do this, but hopefully I'll try to be a bit more consistent in the future. Any Muslims that have been watching or that watch this live stream, please share this on your pages with all of your non-Muslim friends and followers. And if you're a non-Muslim that's been watching this, you're an atheist, I thank you guys for watching this. If you've made it all the way through to this point, hopefully this has been beneficial. Please leave your questions below, and I will speak to you guys next time. If you have any questions now, flick through this and see if there are any questions. I'll address them for you now live, inshallah. If not, just leave them in the question section below, and I can address them there, inshallah. Okay, I don't think there's any questions. Brilliant. Okay, thank you guys for watching, and until next time, take care.